I was in the armed forces as a very young officer for about 8-10 years. And I was on a short service commission, which effectively means, for gig economy. I didn't know this at the time, but I was made redundant without any redundancy pay. I was actually just summarily dismissed because they decided to remodel and reshape the armed forces for the future. And this goes on all the time. So I don't really buy the argument that you can't change someone's terms and conditions when the current climate, technology advances, things are happening and changing all the time.
No, but you said you didn't realise what your terms and conditions were.
Well, I was 19 when I signed up for the Army.
Yes.
I got commissioned as an officer. I thought I was in for life, and I committed my life to the Army. I went on some pretty horrendous operational tours. No pay rises, no ability to strike, no Crown immunity.
Yes.
All these things happened.
And no rights or protections when they decided to get rid of you. So I'm not quite sure what you're. Are you on
2 weeks' notice?
Yes, I know that's appalling. Are you suggesting that because that happened to you, you're in favour of it happening to other people?
No, but what
are you suggesting then?
I'm suggesting that things do change, and you have to sit down there at the table and negotiate and compromise both sides.
That's what they're doing. You didn't have that right, and Liz Truss is pledging to take that right away.
No, and I don't agree with that. But what I do agree with is the idea that there are reasonable things happening right now that people are making big sacrifices for in the private sector as well. So the idea of just saying we're going to strike and make your lives a misery unless you give us more money, when I then and I may not
they just want a pay rise that recognises inflation, because if they don't get a pay rise that outstrips inflation, then every year they're earning less than the year before.
So in the private sector, I've not had a pay rise for 8 years.
You are doing that thing, Paul. Paul, mate. You may not realise it, but you are very much, and I'm very grateful to you for ringing in, because I think you speak for millions. You're jealous.
Not so much. What I am concerned about,
absolutely, and categorically, you're jealous. You're literally telling me that you got shafted by your employer in the past, so you don't see why these employees should have any right of recourse with their employers. They should suck it up just like you had to. And now you're telling me that in your current working life, you don't have protections, you don't have a union speaking up for you, so why the hell should the railway workers have one?
No, honestly, no. I don't believe they shouldn't have a union, but I believe the union are wielding too much power in the sense that they could bring the country to its knees pretty much at will.
How much power do you think they should be allowed to have, Paul?
Sufficient to sit around the table and negotiate and compromise on behalf of their members.
And if the employer doesn't compromise?
Say again?
If the employer doesn't compromise, then what should they be allowed to do?
Then there should be recourse to a higher body, to an arbitration committee that says you're being unreasonable.
The government's refusing to speak to the unions.
And they're at fault as well, and we shouldn't be voting for a government that don't sit around the table.
Unfortunately, that's the government we've got, and that's the government that the unions have to deal with. So if they can't go on strike, what can they do to stop employers treating them like you were treated as a young man?
Well, I'm not sure.
Just pause for a minute. Just think about the question, Paul. No, wait, because I don't want the railway workers to be treated like you were when you were slung out of the army.
No, I agree.
All right? So if they're going to do that to a workforce, what can the union do to stop it from happening?
Well, I mean, the only recourse other than strike action would be some case of law that protects them, that forces the government to get around the table and negotiate.
Liz Truss, I just played you a clip of Liz Truss promising to water down the law that currently protects workers. So in the world we live in, a trade union that wants to protect its members from being treated in the way you were treated as a young man, what weapon would you allow them to have?
Well, I think we have enough frameworks and structures in our country now to
we clearly don't,
sit around the table and
negotiate. But we clearly don't, because that is what they are doing. So when the employer, you keep repeating yourself, because you know, Paul, that the only truly meaningful recourse they have is industrial action, and you've realised that in the course of this conversation. And I don't want to embarrass you by labouring the point. But that is precisely what we've been talking about all morning, because you didn't get looked after when you felt you should have been. You've been turned into a person who doesn't think other people should be looked after either, because you can talk all you like about arbitration or compromises or legislative frameworks. This is a government, and Liz Truss's government is clearly going to be committed to this, that wants to strip away the protections that they already have. And you've been persuaded that that's a good idea, largely because you don't have any yourself.
Okay, I think it's slightly over-pegging it there, James. I don't believe they should have
everyone's
unions.
listening,
that there should be a structure where the government don't have the ability to say, we're not talking to you, and that the unions don't have a retort to say, well, in that case, we're going on strike. If that's the only option, that's not adult. That's not sensible. We need to have a different kind of structure that says... Well, no, you see, you're
so nearly there then. So, I mean, here's the point. If an employer is as inconsiderate and as unreasonable as the army was to you, what could, if all of you and your comrades were in an organisation dedicated to protecting you and your comrades from unfair employment practices, from exploitative employment practices, what could you do to fight back?
Okay, so let me just be absolutely clear. I don't think I was exploited in that sense. I mean, I was on a contract that I should have known better. I should have known at 19 what my employment contract was.
Yeah, so
my point of that, James,
what could you all have done collectively together to resist unfair treatment? What would have been the most effective weapon in your arsenal? An unfair treatment from your employer directed at a small number of your comrades, but you're all going to join forces to resist it. What would be the most effective way of resisting it, Paul?
Well, I don't agree with it, but it would have been to lay down our weapons and not do what we were signed up to do. It would be to completely, don't turn up to work.
So so the only recourse to justice that you had is something that you don't agree with. I mean, the army is a special case, of course, but you wouldn't extend that to railway workers. If your father's on an operating table and all the surgeons go on strike, what do? Do you think, oh, that's fine, they need more money because they're working really hard, but my dad just died of a heart attack on an operating table? That's where I don't agree. If nurses can go on strike... We both know, don't we, that they're not going to go out on strike in the middle of an operation, Paul. So again, I don't want to embarrass you, but we're talking about railway workers today, and and I think still I'm not going to be able to quite crack the final nut here, but your opposition to industrial action is built upon envy, because you don't have recourse to those sort of protections and rights. And here's the thing that perhaps I should have said a little earlier: I think you deserve them too.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure that would work with the armed forces if they
You're not in the armed forces, Paul. They threw you out because you didn't understand your terms and conditions and you didn't have a union. I think you deserve them too. And the mystery of today's phone-in is why you don't think you deserve them.
Well, but, you sign up to a job, you do the job as best as you can, things do change and you have to adapt. And if that means you need less soldiers and less officers, then some have to go.
You're not in the army anymore.
No, but are you referring back to that situation?
No, I'm not. I'm talking about you today. Today, right now, I think you deserve the protection and the dignity that a union can afford, and I'm very, very sorry that you don't have it.
Okay. Can I make one very final point? Because I did say two, and the last one is this, and I may have the exact figures wrong, but my understanding is a junior doctor does about 7 years' worth of training and comes out on about 40 grand a year as a junior doctor in a ward somewhere, something like that. I'm led to believe, and you may tell me it's a lot less or a lot more, but I'm pretty sure it's about 40 grand.
Well, and your point
as I understand it, an average train driver's on about 48 grand. They want more.
We've already covered this. Number one, the train drivers aren't on strike today, and number two, that is an argument for paying doctors more, not for paying railway workers less, Paul.
Why is it not the other way around? Why is it not that the doctors are getting enough and the train drivers are getting too much? How is that not a valid argument?
Because the doctors don't have the union strength that the railway workers have. And just like you, I wish they did, just like I wish you did. Do you see it now?
Is £48,000 the right amount of money?
You just made that number.
You just backwards and drive a train.
Oh, and now you're getting that. So now we're going down. Now we're going down the Rupert Murdoch route. I mean, what do you want me to do? Remind you of the recent rail disasters where people have died? Well, you pretend that it's a trivial job. Just accept the generous.
No, James. No, I'm not saying
just accept the generous and what you are. You're just saying pushing a lever all day long. That is a description of something trivial. All right, I've done my best. I've done my best, Paul. I wish that you had access to the sort of rights and protections that railway workers have.